Does Google's Nest Doorbell deserve a spot next to your front door?
And which mid-range phone is actually the best?
Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support.
Hi there. Welcome back once again to Vertical Hold Behind the Tech News. Each week, we sneak across the state borders to catch up with Australia's leading tech journalists and dive into the big tech stories of the week. I'm Alex Kidman, and I'm joined, as always, by Adam Turner. Hey Adam, this week, Tesla had some good news for you and some bad news. I'll start with the bad news. You're going to be waiting for that Cybertruck you've been dreaming of.
Oh, damn. How am I going to cope? How am I going to get to the shops?
Well, look, the good news there is that Tesla is going to start building autonomous robots.
So they can drive me to the shop or carry me to the shop? I like it.
Maybe. Elon Musk's promised that we're going to be able to outrun them, though, and possibly even beat them up. But I'm going to ask, Adam, did you ever dream of a robot that you could essentially bully?
Yeah, sure. I can't remember a time in history ever when creating a subservient underclass with, the legal right to beat the crap out of them has ever worked out badly for anyone. When the robot revolution comes, Elon will be first up against the wall. I, for one, welcome our new robot overlords.
Okay, so Adam has already turned, folks.
Chosen a side.
We're also joined once again by Pickr Editor Leigh Stark.
Hey guys, thanks for inviting me here again.
You're more than welcome, Leigh. Now, Leigh, if you had to, fight off an Adam Turner-approved army of Tesla bots, what's your game plan for victory?
Look, I feel like I've done this before. I will ask the robots which is the best science fiction show of all time. And
just stand back.
And just to stand back and watch. And if it answers Battlestar Galactica, well, I know what's going to happen.
That's a great plan. I might have to steal that. But we haven't actually brought Leigh into the virtual Vertical Hold studios in order to discuss our upcoming plans to fight off the robot revolution, but instead...
Or lead it. Thank you very much.
Traitor. But instead, more to lean on his expertise when it comes to smartphones, and especially mid-range phones, where a lot of the action currently sits. Motorola's just announced a whole slew of new phones, Vivo's promising Australia's cheapest 5G phone, and there's even a new Pixel in the offing, but we'll get to that a bit later. First up, regular listeners might remember that we discussed Google's new Nest devices a couple of weeks ago on the show, and we've all now had a chance to get to grips with them, and especially Google's new Nest Doorbell. Now, Adam, I know you've got some particular thoughts on what the Nest Doorbell does right and wrong, and I do too. Do you approve of where they've gone with it?
I approve of the idea, and I'm actually surprised it's taken them so long to get it here, because normally Amazon are the ones dragging their heels, treating Australia like second-class citizens. Oh, you don't need that. That's just for Americans. Why is it taking Google so long to bring us a camera? Because it does seem to be the missing piece of the smart home puzzle, I would say. What do you think, Leigh? Are you surprised that it's taken them that long?
Oh, I mean, we've always been kind of second fiddle for Google. This sort of look at the
but
Nest.
Not the way Amazon is. We are with Amazon.
But Amazon bought Ring, and so I don't think we were second fiddle, at least in that regard. Amazon took the right decision there and said, we'll buy a company that already has been doing this, that pioneered this. Google took a long time, and I'm not sure I'm looking off camera, off mic at this. I'm not sure I entirely approve of this gadget, to be honest.
So, Leigh, what strikes you that you don't like?
It's not easy to install, actually. You take it out, it's not quite as seamless as the Ring. The Ring, as far as I'm concerned, is kind of like the gold standard for as far as doorbells go. There are versions that are wired, there are versions that are wireless. It's friendly to renters, it's friendly to people who own. That I like. This is, in theory, friendly to both, but it is just a pain to install. Nothing about it makes sense. You get a metal plate. It kind of feels like it should come with instructions, and it doesn't. That was actually the thing that totally shocked me about it, is that you have to go online and watch a YouTube video to install it, which I found a remarkable change for Google, which is normally pretty direct about everything. The last thing I want to do is sit through a YouTube video to watch how to install a doorbell.
So the weird thing, Leigh, that I found with the way Google does it And Ring does the installation instructions sort of similar-ish. I mean, they do have video tutorials as well. Is within the box, there's a URL to go to get a video, but it's actually for the older
Mm,
Nest Doorbell by default, or at least that's what Google's own SEO brought up, and
yep.
they should be able to control this stuff. Not the new one, but then if you go through the app, it brings up the new one. So they've got real crossed wires there as well. And that's before you get to the point at which you are, screwing metal plates into walls.
Yep.
Now, see, I found that interesting because, yes, it was a bit time consuming and a bit of a hassle to install it. And I will admit that I cheated a little bit.
How did you cheat?
Well, the Google Home is not attached to my house. The Google Home is attached to a fence paling, which is leaning up against the wall next to the front door at the
Right.
same height, at the right height, about 4 foot off the ground. And
Okay.
then I took a sheet of black plastic and I stuck it over the existing doorbell so no one could use it. And every single person who's come to the door so far has figured out that's the doorbell and it's not been a problem. But that part of that was because I can't install it flat against the wall because of the layout of where my front door is. But part of it was it just seemed like a hassle to do something that you're just doing to test. But
So
I've seen people complain that it's much easier to install Ring cameras. Now, this is just two screws into a wall. In theory, it shouldn't be that hard. How does their screwless mount work? What stops your doorbell crushing to the ground?
it's usually it's kind of similar in that there's a two-part backing system. It's also one that you can use the 3M style tape for. So if you don't need to screw it in, you don't have to. The one that's been mounted to my door for the better part of almost 2 years now is actually not screwed in. We're just using 3M backing tape because there's enough for it. I
You're
know
a
that
brave man. I've
it,
never had luck with getting that kind of stuff to hold up anything.
and believe it or not, the first generation Ring from 2017 was doing the same thing. You can, like, it is a well-made system. It allows you to. It is a backing system that actually doesn't feel like you're fiddling around with too much. But I guess my point is on this one, when you're trying to remove the metal backing plate of Google's doorbell, it feels like you have to remove the entire bloody apparatus from the wall itself, and it's crazy. With Ring, you just pop out the battery by removing a plastic cover. Everything about the Ring is easier to pull out. This is not.
That does depend on the model because, and this is another point of difference actually,
Yeah.
most of the Rings use a removable battery, which I
Yep.
generally prefer because if the battery's going to die a couple of years in, you get another one, you're good to go.
You don't have to get an electrician in to install it.
True. There is a model of the Ring where you do.
The pros. Yeah.
Yeah, the Pro has a sealed battery, and I think the very cheapest one, the $150 cheap Ring, I think is also sealed battery as well, if I remember correctly. The big difference, Adam, I would say, it's not so much in getting the backing plate in, it's to do with where the backing plate can sit and how it sits. So
Yeah.
the way Ring does it, basically, I mean, Leigh is taking one approach, and obviously people do not go and steal Leigh's doorbell. He'll see you coming for a
Don't
start.
steal mine
There's
either.
a-
Just
there's
because
a-
it's on a plank, you could still carry it away, you jerks.
There's an Arlo in front of my Ring, so I'm going to catch you on one of them.
You'll be very obvious.
Absolutely.
But
Yes.
neither of them want people to be able to steal them. But the way Ring does this is with a screw in the very bottom of the camera. And it's a custom screw, so it's a little custom screwdriver, so you can't
It's,
just
it's,
wander up and
it's
steal it.
basically a hex key.
It is, yeah. And that works quite well. And I found that works quite well for where I want my doorbell to be. So I've got I'm not a woodworker, and I'm going to use entirely the wrong terms here. So any carpenters listening can scream at me. But they're I've got wood slats that sit over each other, almost like tiles, but they're at an angle. And the Ring can sit on that, and that's fine, and I can access the bottom of it. Google does it exactly the other way round. The way you release is from a thing on the top. You've got to have a couple of centimeters at the top, which, of course, if you've got overlapping planks of wood, just doesn't work at all. You can't do it. I've had to locate it to the side, and it is an absolute sod to actually get to fit on. So, in fact, the end of this story is my Google doorbell is also eminently stealable because whilst it's in the metal slot, it refuses to click into place. But I fear we are in danger of becoming a DIY woodworking podcast rather than a technology one.
I really like balsa wood. I'm just going to put it out there.
Yeah.
I'm really a big fan of balsa wood, but not glue.
I won't kink shame you for that.
I think that there's another major flaw with the camera that sort of becomes clear in the installation point as well. The camera doesn't have a very wide horizontal viewing angle.
Mm.
When you look out from the camera, you can see the sky and you can see the ground. It's got a very wide vertical viewing angle. And according to Google stats, it has a 145-degree diagonal viewing angle, he says with air quotes. Now, that's pretty meaningless because what that actually translates is to about a 90-degree horizontal viewing angle.
Mm.
So basically, if you've got like my front door, where it's in an alcove. So to the immediate left of the front door is a wall going out. And that's where the camera sits in that corner. And it can basically see the edge of the wall and the edge of the house if I use the mount that they give you to angle it on an angle and then put a bit of wood behind it to turn it even more because that's not enough.
This really is a woodworking podcast right
Yes,
now.
it
Yeah.
is. But if you had a porch where your door was in the middle of the porch and then the porch extended both sides and you wanted to see all of the porch, this thing is pretty useless. Whereas some rival door cams will do more like a 180-degree horizontal viewing
Yep.
angle. This is very narrow from that perspective. And so if you've got people coming up and leaving parcels on the side or coming in from the sides and not straight at the camera, you might really find it frustrating, and that becomes clear in the installation process when you're trying to angle it and go, hang on, I can't see everything I want to see.
Well, this also brings up another interesting point I was going to make, because I've used the Ring doorbells. In fact, I don't think there's a Ring doorbell they've released in this country that I haven't tested at some
Yep.
point. I've used them in a quite dedicated fashion for the past couple of years, and to be fair to Google, I've only been using the Google doorbell since it turned up about a week or so ago. But the big thing that I've noticed is that on the same internet connection, the Ring is faster to notify me, which is surprising, really. Google can do some clever things if you're at Google Home, and obviously the Ring can do some clever things if you're an Amazon Home.
Yep.
But beyond that, just that simple, hey, there's someone coming, the Ring is faster. I will swear the Ring is faster. The Google is not bad, but
There's
the
a
Ring will
definite
very much tell
delay.
me when someone's coming before they hit the doorbell, whereas generally speaking, they've hit the doorbell, like they've reached the doorbell, and I get the notification pretty much at the point at which they're actually pressing the button to let me know they're there anyway.
It basically it feels like a first gen product. That's really what it comes down to. For all the design cred that Google has typically, this feels like a first gen product that needed a lot more testing before it was released. That's where I'm coming from.
So, how does the Google stack up against the Ring in terms of how smart it is at knowing what it can see? Because this is one of the things I really like about the Google. And these are features that you used to have to pay extra for for a Nest Aware subscription that now work for free with this doorbell. It's got the ability to recognize when it can see a person as opposed to just a tree moving or a car going past, whatever. It's in theory got the ability to recognize if that person is carrying a parcel. So it can say there is someone coming to the door. So if a courier comes along, drops off a parcel, and doesn't bother to ring the doorbell, I still know that someone is being, but it's not going to be set off by the postie at the letterbox, and it's not going to be set off by a dog in the yard. Is Ring's image analysis that smart? Can Ring say there is a person out there rather than dude something moved?
I don't believe so.
Neither do I.
I've got a Ring 2 installed, so I'm a little out of date there, partly because I'm too lazy to install one. Every time there's someone like, oh, I don't really want to install a new one. I'm a really bad journo when it comes to setting up doorbells, partly because my woodworking's terrible.
I'm
But
sure Alex has half a dozen. It's like smartwatches all the way. He's up his arm. You go to his house and there's just this row of doorbells. You got to choose which one you want to press.
yeah, but
So
whichever one you press enters the wrong part of the Kidman household, you might get attacked by cats.
Or Gus.
Oh, Gus, yeah. But I've not seen the Ring do what you're saying. Arlo's system can. I do know that Arlo's system does look at packages, but again, you've got to pay extra for it. But my understanding of Google's one was that you did have to pay extra for aspects of that. The Nest Aware wasn't entirely, I guess, available from the get-go beyond a trial. That was my understanding of that.
No,
it's
it'll do
facial
people.
recognition, isn't it?
Yeah, you got to pay for
That you
that.
have to
Yeah.
pay so that it'll know, so that Google will tell you that it knows.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's part of my head that wonders if Google actually just knows and says, well, we'll keep that info for ourselves unless you hand over the dough.
Yeah. That's Ted. We all know it.
The other thing, though, that Google does give you, and I'll give them this over Ring, Google gives you a little bit more recording capability relative to Ring. You'll get a trial with Ring, but then they want a certain fixed sum per year
Yep.
for ongoing recording. Either of them will give you alerts. You can kind of see stuff but Google, off the top of my head, I think it's about a 3-hour rolling video archive that they will let you have.
Yep.
Is that even when it's on batteries, or is it got to be on power to get the consistent 3 hours?
I believe that's irrespective. I think that's
Okay.
cloud rather
Yeah.
than power situation.
So if your NBN goes down, you're screwed. But other than that, it's
Yeah.
fine.
But also, that's going to drain the battery on the doorbell as well. Because the thing is with this doorbell, it is battery powered. So every now and then you're going to have to take it off the front door, bring it inside, charge it up, and hope that no one comes to the front door.
It
But
doesn't have to be battery powered.
that's the same for almost all the other systems. Ring has setups. In fact, I've got one which I do not have wired in by an electrician, but which I could have wired
Yeah.
in
Mm.
But
by
if
an
you leave that
electrician if I
running,
chose
then you're
to.
going to have to charge it more often. If you don't leave the constant video going up to the cloud, then
But it's
surely
not.
the battery's going to last
Sorry,
longer.
Adam. I'll clarify. It's not, to my understanding, it is not. Um, it is not constant 24/7 video monitoring. It's whether or not 3 hours after the event you can go back and say, I want to see
It
exactly
stores an
where
event for
the
3 hours, not
where the courier decided to take the
yeah.
key on my
I thought we are
car or
talking about
whatever.
3 hours of rolling
What?
video.
Maybe I get angry at
I live
couriers than you two.
there's a vacant block of land across from my house, so you can imagine what couriers do after they drop off parcels at my house. It's not good.
We went from the woodworking podcast to the pea podcast. Wow.
Yes.
But yeah, Ring wants money for
Yeah.
that. Arlo, I think they've changed their tune on that. They used to give you a certain amount, and I'm not sure that they still do.
I definitely pay for one of the Arlo cameras. And I know that the extra updates on things like packages, at least on the floodlight I've got, are not free. That much I do know.
So I think the big thing with the Google, the big shortcoming, and I'd be interested to see how this stacks up against the Arlo and the Ring, is the lack of granular control over notifications. It's pretty much all or nothing, right? I can either I can set up notifications on my phone, and I can set up notifications to the smart speakers and screens in the house. But it has to be every one of them. So if someone comes to the doorbell and presses the doorbell, every damn Google smart device in the house wakes up and shouts to someone at the door.
Mm.
Who designs this stuff? People without partners, without children, people who live in little bubbles in San Francisco and never think about the real world.
Well,
Yes.
they don't have long houses in San
If
Francisco.
you're a shift worker, if you have children in the house, I mean, I have health problems, which means sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and then end up going back to bed for an hour or two in the middle of the day. And the day this bastard wakes me up in the middle of the day because someone's rung the doorbell is the day it goes in the creek. But there's no way to say, okay, I don't want you to do it in the bedrooms, or I don't want you to do it between certain times of day. And you can't even say, all right, I just want all the speakers to go bing bong. All the speakers go bing bong and then shout, literally, there's someone at the door. They chant it. And because all the speakers aren't quite in unison, it echoes throughout the house. The ability to turn that off would be great. Otherwise, once COVID's over and you can actually have people to your house, the day you have a party and someone's ringing the doorbell every 15 minutes, again, you will stomp on this thing because you will be sick to death of it. And there's no way, the only actual way to get around that is to not use the speaker notifications at all and to wire up this thing to your old doorbell chime so you get an old ring. That's the only way around it.
So I'll tell you the thing that I don't like about Ring, but the thing I absolutely love about it. The thing I absolutely don't like is that in the 4 years this thing's been around, there's actually no scheduling system. If I don't want my doorbell to be on at between the hours of like 7 a.m. and 5 p.m. when I'm actually awake and doing things, I can't actually schedule that. I have to physically turn it off or turn off one of the components in the app. What I love about it is that Ring makes little chimes to put around the house, and all they do is ring. They just make a sound when
That's what I
someone
want.
presses the doorbell.
Yeah.
The probably the best thing about them is they don't fire off when there's a motion sensor, because that'll happen all the time. They only happen when someone presses the doorbell. Each of
You
those
can
things,
tell them to do motion.
you can tell them to do motion, but by default they don't. So it means that if someone pressed the doorbell, if I have one way up in the back of my house and obviously the doorbell at the front, I can hear the doorbell when I'm at the front of the house, but then I can also hear the doorbell at the back, and that's all it is. It's not connected to any of my speakers. It's not making dumb calls like you're getting. It's just a ding dong, or you know what it is. It's the ring sound.
So, Adam, you can, in theory, actually create a home routine for a Nest doorbell. I have not yet done this with the one that I have, but you can, in theory, if you're happy to tell Google that you're there, and and strictly speaking, I suspect mostly if you're running an Android phone, so that it knows, hey, Adam's Android phone is at home, therefore he's at home, therefore maybe don't track him every time he goes to take the trash out.
Well, that's
Um,
yeah, that's actually a different problem. Yeah, but I shouldn't have to curate a routine for something so simple. But B, it can't tell the difference between me walking in the door and me walking out the door.
Mm.
So again, once COVID times are over, every time any member of your house leaves the house, your phone will ping. The doorbell won't go, "Hey, there's someone here." And when you go to put the rubbish out, the phone will ping because it can't tell the difference between the back of your head and the front of your head. Apparently, it can't say, "Hey, this person just appeared from nowhere. I think they walked out the door."
But
so this is
what you
why I
can
have silence notifications, so they just visually turn up on my phone.
But what you can do is do that routine thing, and if you really like Prince, you can set it up so that every time someone presses the doorbell, it plays "Call My Name" every single time. You will never get tired of that song. I know Alex won't.
Yeah, no, well, that's actually a brilliant idea, and I wish I'd thought of it first.
Well,
So I know what I'm
you can
doing as
take
soon
it
as this podcast's over, by the way.
along with the Robot Overlord challenge. You can take that one. I'm just filled with ideas.
So, Lee, we're talking mid range phones. And my first question is exactly what is a mid range phone these days? Are we talking 500 to 1,000, sub 500? And where's the crap cutoff line? Like anything under $200 you wouldn't give to your kid? Like, what do we call mid range these days?
Let's call the crap cutoff line $350 at the moment because
Oh,
that's
wow.
roughly
Okay.
where it
That's
is.
high. I would have thought it was a bit lower than that.
Now,
And I'm just going to butt in here, as I usually do. I would say it's a little lower depending on your wants and needs. I'd
mm,
probably put it at, sometimes even under 200.
Ooh,
Depends what you can get for the money.
at a
But
post
I
office
think
special.
the reason why mid range is so kind of interesting is because there's so many features that are now in mid range, and we see so many little floods of mid range phones come
mm,
in. Lee, Motorola's just announced a flood of phones. I think it's fair to say.
a trio, yes.
Yeah, they're trying to
A
capture an
plethora.
edge in the market, but why should we be excited?
I think we're excited because it involves a very large camera. I mean, they all do. They're using a 108 megapixel sensor. It's a slight evolution, actually, on the one marginally that was in the Galaxy S20 Ultra last year. So the trios is from the Edge 20, the Edge 20 Fusion, Edge 20, Edge 20 Pro. They're coming for 500, 700, and 900 respectively. And the most interesting thing about them is they're all technically or very close to being the same large phone, but they have a 108 megapixel camera in it. And normally the camera is where most people get super excited for phones these days. So to see such a large megapixel amount in a phone that's under $1,000 in three different price points, that gets rather interesting.
Yeah, and Motorola. I mean, Motorola hasn't done bad cameras, but I'm struggling to think of one where I thought, "Wow, that's a really good camera for the money."
Well,
Historically,
it's technically a Samsung camera. Let's just put that
sure,
out
sure,
there.
sure.
So it's technically a Samsung sensor with some Motorola glass in front of it. Probably someone else's glass. But I can think what's so interesting about it is these massive cameras have only been in Samsung and Xiaomi phones, and no one
Hmm.
really buys Xiaomi phones in this country anyway. So pretty much just Samsung phones. And I'm curious to see them. What I don't quite understand is such the variability in price points, because you've got an expensive version, and as you're saying before, Adam, you've got $1,000 mid-range phones, you've got $700
So we'll
mid-range
call
phones.
$1,000 mid range. Is that
We
what we're saying?
we call $1,000 high mid-range because it's so close
Or
to
low end
flagship
premium,
or low
depending
end
on who you're
premium.
talking.
That's
Yeah,
right, because phones are no longer $1,000 max; they're $2,500,
Yeah.
$2,800 maximum, and so it's kind of a cheat. It started happening a few years ago. Samsung did it first, where they released, I think, the Galaxy A series, and it was like $750, $800 at a time when phones were just beginning to hit that $1,400 limit. But these days, when you buy flagship, you get the very best camera. You might get a foldable screen, and that's what you get. We're seeing all those cool features. The 5G, yeah, cool, kind of. We're seeing the 5G trickle down. We're seeing the better cameras, and so it is getting more interesting to kind of buy a phone that won't cost you the proverbial arm and a leg.
now, Lee, you're a man who knows more about cameras, or in fact, who's probably forgotten more about cameras than I'll ever know. 108 megapixels is a great marketing number. It
Yeah,
sounds insanely impressive when you consider that some competitor phones in the same price ranges you're looking at like a 12 megapixel primary
that's right.
camera. But that number isn't the be all and end all of camera optics, is it?
you're also not getting the 108 megapixels. I mean, you are, but you're technically not. So for people who don't really understand this, the type of sensor that we use for this actually combines 4 pixels. So you actually only get a 27 megapixel camera. I say only. That's still a pretty big camera when in the pretty big megapixel amount in the grand scheme of things. But megapixels aren't everything. How it performs in low light, how the camera actually works in line with the other cameras in the body, they're all important. The ultra wide to the is kind of useful to have if you're getting far back, but it's typically really not great in low light. Almost none of the ultra wides are good in
Or for
low
those,
lights.
yeah, or for those periods at some point in the future when we're allowed to go outside and can shoot landscapes.
Yeah, absolutely. But there's a random fact about all the ultra wides. They're almost all fantastic for macros. They're all very wide lenses. They allow you to get quite close. That's what a macro camera is on a phone. And then you get the telephoto, which allows you to get a little bit closer. That's interesting because, you're probably not going to do the crazy Samsung space zoom, which is useless.
Very.
Giant digital cropping, basically all it is. But it is interesting at least to see that. So while the camera quality is not going to be the be all end all on these things, having that ability to shoot 4 pixels for every one could actually result in better quality images for a camera in this price point. It's the equivalent of using a better sensor as I guess at a less expensive price than say what Apple and Samsung and Google do, which is create a better sensor overall that works on everything. The 12 megapixels that Samsung uses or the 12 megapixels that Apple uses may not sound as high. It's a good marketing ploy for Motorola. They might not sound as high, but they do a better job overall. Larger photo sites, more light gets let in, and the glass quality is better. I don't know what the glass quality on this is going to be like. My guess is acceptable, but it's not like it's going to be shooting with a Leica.
Well, you mentioned the glass. The other thing that a lot of Motorola's phones, and to be fair, this is kind of new territory for Motorola in a way in
Mm.
Australia, because so much of what they've sold in the past couple of years have been all their G series, really affordable. And Adam, this is where we're
These
getting
are
into that
nice phones for
Yeah.
what
distinction
they are.
between budget and mid
Yeah,
range because they were lower cost than
yeah.
most of these. Um, the one thing they always kind of had to nervously shuffle around was what happened when you got them wet. They'd always kind of say, "Oh, well, it's got a hydrophobic covering, and
We
but it
we
doesn't have an IP rating."
we
These
kind
ones
of went
are
hard.
these ones are IP rated, aren't they, Lee?
Yeah,
But there's a catch.
there is a catch. We kind of went hard on Motorola during this briefing, both you and I, on this one, and they didn't really have a great answer for it. It's IP52, if I recall,
Yeah,
and 52 is really not worth anything. You may as well call that sweat resistant barely.
Hang on,
Um,
I'm trying to remember my IPs.
so the
Back from
first number
run
is
the
first
dust.
number is
academy.
dust. The second number is water.
So it's
Two,
got a water rating of 2 out of
it's
10, which
yeah.
means what? You can spit on it? Like,
It means so. Actually, I remember when Motorola launched. Do you guys remember the first Razr that was Android, the one that wasn't foldable, the one that
Yeah,
was
yeah, yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So when they launched that in the city, I recall them saying, it must have been the same PR guy, or the comms guy, the marketing guy, Danny, and he said, "Oh, it's good if you drop a beer on it." This is marginally worse than that. This is acceptable if you drop a light alcohol or a gin. If you drop a gin on this, wipe it off as quickly as possible. It will probably be fine. But if you drop a beer on it, there's way too much in that glass for the phone to survive. This is a light sweat. This is the sort of rating you expect on earphones if you go running for basic sweat 5 years ago. It's not what you expect on a phone to survive the rigors of every day. It'll handle the beach, but it won't handle the water at the beach. That's a problem.
To be fair to Motorola, there's an awful lot of phones in that mid-range price bracket which have no IP rated water
Absolutely
resistance at
true.
all.
Yeah.
They've at least actually said, look, we've done the testing and we reckon it's okay for this.
Yeah.
Where lots and lots of competitors just kind of go, look, yeah, maybe don't get it wet or feed
you're
it
on
after
your own,
midnight.
man. Yeah.
I think I've been asking about this since the Motorola G3 though, because that phone, like we're talking a phone that's what 6 years old now. That phone was IP rated for I think 55 or 56. I mean, they go backwards almost every generation. That was a water resistant phone. I mean, the advertising was you could take it in the desert, it would survive all of your sweat. And ever since then, the G series has just largely ignored the water resistance altogether. Now, it's true that not every phone even tests for that. I remember speaking to Oppo a few years ago, and they said we don't do the. I don't know if this is on record or off record. I think someone there told me that basically they don't do the rating test because it costs money, but theoretically the phone can survive. They just don't talk about it. But it's entirely possible that these phones could survive, but it's just kind of frustrating. They're not advertising, however, the Edge series with the IP52. It's just kind of a note that they have. I recall in that briefing, it's like, we're not really telling people it's IP52, which is at least kind of positive because people aren't going to go out and properly test it until they hear this show, which they've learned about woodworking, robot fights, and the fact that the phone is apparently not water resistant, even though it might be.
Well, it's slightly water resistant.
It's robot resistant.
You brought up the G series, and they've also got a new G series phone, and that one is a bit cheaper. That's $399. The G55G,
Mm.
and its big thing is, hey, it's a 5G phone under $400.
That's not a big thing these days.
Well, I was going to say, because that brings us on to Vivo, who are a stablemate of Oppo's in the whole BBK Electronics empire of phone brands, because they've launched what they're calling the cheapest 5G phone, the Vivo Y52.
Do not buy any phone with the term cheapest in it. That's just a recipe for disaster, surely.
And it's actually, it is a point. I mean, so the cheapest 5G phone I've reviewed before this was the Oppo A54 5G.
Yep.
And I think that was like $350 or $399 at the time when it came out. And it's an okay phone with not fantastic performance. It actually feels almost like it's deliberately underpowered. I suspect because of the memory it's got in it. And the discussion I had with another reviewer was like, why isn't this running Android Go? And it's because it just has too much, the specs are too high for Android Go. So it's basically a phone that doesn't perform as well as it could, so go buy the one that costs $50 more. It's so, the whole cheapest 5G phone thing is, yay, you get a cheap phone, you get NFC. That's actually kind of a win for that section. And you get 5G, but the performance is so bad that you probably wouldn't use the 5G anyway.
So really, it's nastiest 5G phone.
Yeah, kind of.
No, well,
yeah.
so I have actually tested this phone.
Okay.
Spoiler alert.
The Vivo?
The Vivo. I have
Okay.
tested it. I have tested this phone, and look, you're not entirely wrong. It's definitely built to a price, but I think there is a market there for people who are not necessarily after that full-on cutting-edge performance, who are fine with, okay, this is a little bit slower, and they might be coming from like a 3-4-year-old phone. This will outpace that. And they might just think, well, 5G is not vital to me, but this way, this is a phone that has a shelf life that is longer than something 4G right now.
I feel like I've become Adam Turner, though, because I'm going to say something that is very unlike me. The problem I have with a lot of 5G in cheap phones is that 5G hasn't solved anything yet. And introducing 5G in a $400 phone when you could just spend $100 more and get like the Pixel 4a, which is a fantastic phone with a great camera and is still 4G, makes me just say, go get the one without 4G that's better, because it's actually a better device overall.
It's also not future-proofing because no phone you buy today is going to last until the death of the 4G network.
No.
So if it's got 4G, you don't need 5G. It's not future-proofing.
I'm presenting a viewpoint. Or
I get it.
Yeah,
but especially if it's a cheap and nasty phone, it's not going to last you to the death of 5G.
Yeah.
Of 4G.
But Leigh, you brought up the Pixels, and they're in an interesting position because they're very much, they've been the mid-range recommendation from almost everyone.
Every journo says the same thing. We've all said it. We've all said it in the past year several times.
There's a big problem right now.
Yeah.
And it's one of Google's making. Because if you want a Pixel 4a, if you want a Pixel 4a 5G, even if you want a Pixel 5, you want to buy it from Google, you can't.
Yeah, it's crazy. They've discontinued them because they've released something overseas but not in Australia, which I still don't understand the release of this product. So Google's released the Pixel 5a, which is, for all intents and purposes, a Pixel 4a with 5G, I think in a Pixel 5 size. I don't
More
even
or less, yeah.
Yeah, I don't actually understand this release because, again, we've all said this. The Pixel 5 is a great phone, not technically a flagship, but still a fantastic phone. The Pixel 4a with 5G is an amazing mid-range device for a 5G phone, and the Pixel 4a is fantastic as well. I don't understand what they've done. It's almost like they just said, well, let's shuffle everyone off to the new size and kill it for everyone else in the world as we wait for the Pixel 6, which is also going to be a high-end phone. I'm very confused.
Yeah, they've just not said anything, and I think it's emblematic of that kind of Google strategy of, oh yeah, we're just kind of discontinuing this product, and I don't know that they've looked much beyond the Americas. But with that in mind, Leigh, if you had to recommend, bearing in mind you can't buy, at least from Google, there's probably some on a store shelf somewhere, but bearing in mind that you can't easily buy a Pixel 4a. If you had to pick a mid-range phone right now for someone to buy, what would you suggest?
Uh, I haven't tried the Oppo A94 beneath my desk. I really want to, because the what I liked I think it was the A54 had a good idea. It just was slow. The A94 looks like a good option. I actually really liked the last Moto that we had, the Moto G5G Plus. I thought that was a good mid-range phone for the price, around the $500 mark. It actually worked quite well. It wasn't Its camera wasn't amazing, but if you can still find the Pixel, that or the iPhone SE, like I'm not a huge fan of that older style. I actually prefer
Battery
the
life's
old school style.
awful.
The battery life is atrocious, but the battery life's atrocious on a $1,500 Galaxy Z Flip 3. Like it's atrocious there as well.
Sure,
So
sure, sure.
I'm not going to tarnish Apple with that one. There
Yeah.
are problems across the board. It's a fantastic phone for what it is. It's still a weird concoction. It's an iPhone 11 chip, with an iPhone 10R camera and an iPhone 8 body. It's such a crazy combination for Apple to succeed with, but it works so well. And there are a lot of people who would naturally migrate to a cheaper Android because they think they can't afford an iPhone because iPhones are expensive. And yet the iPhone SE is a very good value if you can't find the Pixel 4a.
Well, that just about wraps up yet another episode of Vertical Hold. Thanks to Leigh for joining us for this week's show.
Thank you, and Voyager is still the best science fiction show ever.
Well, sadly for you, Leigh, we've moved on in critical questions. But
Oh.
you do sort of know what's coming.
Oh, God.
The Vertical Hold 3 Questions of Doom.
Oh, God.
So, Leigh, where can people find your work online? Where can they find your social media online? And the contentious question of the moment, you're on a deadline. What is your snack or takeaway food of choice to get you through it?
Oh, God. I haven't had coffee in 9 weeks. So you can find me on pickr.com.au and on Twitter. What was the second question?
Social
You're
media.
walking through the
Social
desert.
really
media.
you
haven't
find-
had-
I haven't had coffee in 9 weeks. That was the
You're
worst
walking
thing
through
to do.
the desert. You find a turtle that's lying on its back. I'm a bit suspicious at this point. We need some confirmation here, Leigh.
I'm just gonna go with coffee because I'm gin. Gin is the answer. Gin gets me through everything. It's fine.
Yeah.
I'm gin addicted
human.
now. Yep.
Vertical Hold does not condone day drinking. But as always, you can
does
catch
endorse
us
it.
online at Vertical Hold AU on Twitter, at verticalhold.com.au on the web, or via the Vertical Hold Facebook page.
And as always, thanks everyone for listening, human and robot alike. Hang in there. We know it's tough at the moment. Thanks for listening. Tell your friends about us. Help us spread the good word. Leave us a review on your podcasting platform of choice. And Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support.
They're not in the spreadsheet.
No,
I
they're
think
secret.
we need to change the question. Think it needs to be favorite robot dystopian future.